When I opened the jewelry box my husband gave me 50 years ago, it was empty. I still remember the sound it made. That soft little creak of old wood opening. For a second, I thought my eyes were failing me again. At my age, that wouldn't have surprised me. I blinked twice and leaned closer toward the velvet lining inside the box. Empty. No gold bangles. No wedding necklace. No diamond earrings. Nothing. Only the faint imprint where they had rested for decades, like ghosts pressed into faded red velvet. My hand started trembling so badly I nearly dropped the box. "No," I whispered. I sat down slowly on the edge of my bed because suddenly my knees didn't feel strong enough to hold me anymore. The afternoon sunlight was pouring through the curtains, warming the room in that soft golden way my husband used to love. But at that moment, the warmth felt cruel. I touched the inside of the box carefully, almost expecting the jewelry to magically appear again. But it didn't. It was gone. Every single piece. And deep inside my chest, something terrible began to bloom. Not panic. Not yet. Something worse. Suspicion. Because only one person knew where I kept that box. My daughter, Mira. I closed the lid slowly and stared at the carved roses on top of it. My husband had bought that jewelry box during our honeymoon trip to Jaipur in 1974. "Oh, Savitri," he had laughed while handing it to me, "a queen needs a proper place for her treasures." Back then, he had thick black hair and mischievous eyes that could make even the hardest days feel lighter. And I had laughed too. I was 21 years old. Too young to understand that one day memories would become more valuable than gold. I ran my fingers over the box and tears burned my eyes. Those ornaments weren't just jewelry. They were my life. The bangles were bought after my husband got his first promotion as a school principal. The necklace came from selling his scooter because he knew I loved it but would never ask for it. The earrings were from our 25th anniversary. Each piece carried a story. A sacrifice. A moment. And now they were gone. I looked toward the bedroom door. "Mira?" I called weakly. No answer. The house was quiet except for the ticking wall clock in the hall. Tick. 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 It suddenly sounded louder than ever before. I stood carefully and walked toward the kitchen, my chest tightening with every step. "Mira?" Still nothing. Her teacup sat in the sink. Half-washed. That meant she had left recently. I opened the fridge absent-mindedly, then closed it again. My thoughts were too tangled to think clearly. Maybe I moved the jewelry. Maybe I forgot. Old people forget things. That's what everyone says. I went back to my room and checked every drawer. My sari cabinet. Under the mattress. Inside old tins. Even the bathroom shelf for some ridiculous reason. Nothing. The jewelry was gone. By evening, my breathing had become uneven. I sat in the living room waiting for Mira to come home. Outside, the sky darkened slowly while neighborhood children played cricket in the lane. Normally, their shouting made me smile. That evening, it only made me feel lonelier. At exactly 7:12 p.m., I heard the front gate creak. Then footsteps. Then Mira entered holding grocery bags. "Ma," she called casually. "Why are you sitting in the dark?" I hadn't even realized the lights were off. She switched them on and stopped when she saw my face. What happened? I looked at her carefully. My daughter was 50 now, but stress had aged her faster than time. There were lines near her mouth that hadn't existed before her divorce. I had always felt sorry for her. Maybe too sorry. The jewelry box is empty, I said quietly. For 1 second. Just 1 second. Something flashed across her face. Not confusion. Not shock. Fear. But it vanished so quickly another person might have missed it. What? She asked. My jewelry, I whispered. It's gone. She put the grocery bags down slowly. Did you move it somewhere? No. Maybe you forgot. That hurt more than I expected. Because that's what people say when they stop seeing you as capable. Forgetful. Old. Confused. I looked directly into her eyes. I didn't forget. She crossed her arms tightly. When did you last check it? Last month. Well, then maybe someone stole it. Who? She hesitated. We've had workers in the house. The plumber came last week. I shook my head immediately. No. The box was hidden. Silence filled the room. Heavy silence. Then she sighed dramatically and rubbed her forehead. Ma, why are you looking at me like that? I hadn't realized I was. But apparently I was. Because suddenly her voice became defensive. You think I took it? I didn't say that. But you're thinking it. I looked away. The truth was, yes. I was thinking it. And that realization made me feel sick. A mother should never suspect her child. But a mother also knows her child better than anyone. And lately, Mira had been behaving strangely. Phone calls she wouldn't answer near me. Whispering in corners. Bills piling up. One evening, I had accidentally overheard her crying about debt. But whenever I asked, she brushed it off. Everything's fine, Ma. Everything was never fine when people said it like that. I'm just asking, I said softly. Well, don't. Her tone sharpened. I would never steal from my own mother. The word steal echoed painfully in the room. I swallowed hard. I didn't use that word. You didn't have to. Then she grabbed the grocery bags and marched into the kitchen. I heard cabinets slamming. The old Mira never slammed cabinets. That was something new. Something anger had taught her. I stayed silent. That night during dinner, neither of us spoke much. The dal tasted too salty. Or maybe it was my tears. I couldn't tell anymore. After dinner, Mira sat on the sofa scrolling through her phone while I folded laundry slowly beside her. I kept glancing at her, searching her face for guilt. But guilt is slippery. It hides. Especially in the people we love most. Finally, I asked quietly, "Are you in trouble financially?" She froze. Only for a moment. Then she laughed without humor. At this age you think I'd tell you if I was? I'm your mother. And I'm not a child anymore. That's not what I mean. She put the phone down sharply. Why are you interrogating me? I'm worried. Well, don't be. Her voice cracked slightly at the end. And suddenly I saw exhaustion in her eyes. Real exhaustion. The kind that comes from carrying burdens too long. For a moment, my suspicion weakened. Maybe she really didn't know anything. Maybe I was becoming exactly what I feared. An old woman losing her memory and accusing innocent people. I almost apologized. Almost. But then I noticed something. Around her wrist was a bracelet. Gold. Thin. Familiar. My breath caught. It wasn't mine exactly, but it looked almost identical to a bracelet set I once owned. A set missing from the jewelry box. "Where did you get that?" I asked quietly. She immediately covered it with her sleeve. "This old thing? I've had it forever." No, she hadn't. I would remember. A mother notices these things. My chest tightened again. "Mira." She stood up suddenly. "I'm tired, Ma. Please stop." Then she walked to her room and shut the door. Not slammed. Shut. But firmly enough to end the conversation. I sat alone in the living room for a long time afterward. The ceiling fan hummed overhead. Somewhere outside, a dog barked repeatedly. I stared at the closed hallway door. And memories came flooding back. Mira at age 6, running into my arms after school. Mira at 13, crying because classmates mocked her braces. Mira at 24, holding her newborn son while trembling with happiness. My daughter. My child. Could she really have done this? I didn't sleep that night. Around 2 a.m., I got up for water. As I passed Mira's room, I noticed light beneath her door. Voices too. Whispering. I stopped. "I just need more time," she whispered urgently. A man's voice answered faintly through the phone speaker. "You promised last week." "I know. No more delays." My stomach nodded. Then Mira said something that turned my blood cold. "I already gave you most of the gold." Gold. I nearly dropped the water glass in my hand. Inside the room, silence fell. Then footsteps approached the door. I hurried away toward the kitchen as fast as my old legs allowed. My heart pounded violently. A few seconds later, her bedroom door opened. I pretended to drink water. "Ma," she asked suspiciously. I turned slowly. "Yes? What are you doing awake?" "Couldn't sleep." She studied my face carefully. "Did you hear anything?" I forced myself to shake my head. "No." For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then she nodded once and returned to her room. But I no longer needed proof. A terrible truth had already entered my heart. And once truth enters, nothing is ever the same again. At sunrise, I opened the old family photo album. There was a picture from our wedding day. I touched my younger self gently. The necklace around my neck sparkled brightly in the photograph. Gone now. Sold. Perhaps melted already. Reduced to money. I began crying so quietly even I could barely hear it. Not because of the jewelry, but because somewhere along the way, my daughter had stopped coming to me when life became difficult. And instead, she had chosen betrayal. I did not confront Mira the next morning. Some people might wonder why. If I already suspected her, if I had heard her admit over the phone that she had given most of the gold, why didn't I walk straight into her room and demand the truth? Because mothers are cowards when it comes to their children. That is the truth nobody says aloud. We can fight the world for them. But against them? Our hearts become weak. I spent the entire morning pretending nothing had happened. I made tea. Watered the tulsi plant outside. Folded old saris. Anything to keep my hands busy while my mind quietly broke apart. Mira came out around 9 wearing a pale blue kurta, her hair tied hurriedly into a loose bun. She looked tired. Not ordinary tired. Haunted tired. There were dark circles beneath her eyes, and for a brief second, guilt touched me. Maybe she truly had no choice. Maybe something terrible had happened. But then another voice inside me whispered, "And that gave her the right to steal from you?" She avoided looking directly at me during breakfast. "Do you want more toast?" she asked. "No. You barely ate." "I'm not hungry." Silence. Then she sighed softly. "Ma, are you still upset?" Upset. Such a small word for such a large wound. I looked at her carefully. "When were you planning to tell me?" The color drained from her face instantly. "To tell you what?" I held her gaze. "The truth." For a moment, I thought she might confess. I saw panic flicker across her eyes. But then she looked away. "I don't know what you're talking about." And there it was. The lie. Clear. Deliberate. It hurt more than the missing jewelry ever could. I pushed my teacup aside quietly. "You used to be a terrible liar when you were little," I murmured. She stiffened. "Ma, you'd hide broken things behind your back and smile too much. Please stop. Your left eyebrow still twitches when you lie." She stood up abruptly. "I have work." Then she grabbed her handbag and rushed toward the door. Too quickly. Too nervously. And as she bent to wear her sandals, something slipped from her purse onto the floor. A folded paper. She didn't notice. I did. My eyes dropped to it immediately. So did hers. For one terrible second, we both stared at the paper lying between us. Then she snatched it up quickly. Too quickly. "What's that?" I asked quietly. "Nothing." "Show me." "It's private." My voice hardened for the first time in years. "Show me, Mira." She froze. And suddenly I saw something unexpected in her expression. Not anger. Fear. Real fear. Her fingers tightened around the paper. Then, without another word, she shoved it back into her purse and walked out. The front door slammed behind her. I sat there motionless. My tea had gone cold. A terrible feeling settled into my stomach. Something bigger was happening. Much bigger. That afternoon, I did something I never imagined myself doing. I searched my daughter's room. Even now, remembering it makes my chest ache with shame. A mother should not sneak through her child's belongings like a thief. But betrayal changes people. And grief changes them even more. Her room smelled faintly of jasmine perfume and stress. Yes, stress has a smell. Like sleepless nights and hidden tears. I opened drawers carefully. Bills. Medicine strips. Old receipts. Nothing unusual. Then I checked the wardrobe. At first, I found only clothes piled carelessly. But underneath a stack of shawls, I saw a small black pouch. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was one of my bangles. Only one. The thinner gold bangle my husband had gifted me after Mira was born. I immediately recognized the tiny dent near the clasp from when baby Mira had once bitten it while teething. My knees nearly gave out. I sat on the floor clutching the bangle against my chest. "Oh, Hari," I whispered to my late husband. Why would she do this? Tears blurred my vision. But then something else caught my attention inside the pouch. A receipt. From a pawn shop. I unfolded it slowly. And my heart shattered completely. 3 gold bangles. 1 necklace. 2 earrings. Sold. The date was from 2 weeks ago. Seller name, Mira Sharma. There it was. Proof. Cold. Merciless. Undeniable. I stared at the paper for so long the words began swimming before my eyes. My daughter had sold my wedding jewelry. Behind my back. Without asking. Without telling me. Without even giving me the dignity of a conversation. And suddenly all the memories attached to those ornaments began flooding through me like a storm. I remembered my husband standing outside a jewelry store during monsoon season, drenched in rain because he had spent 2 hours bargaining for the necklace I loved. I remembered us skipping vacations for years to save money. I remembered pawning my own earrings once to pay Mira's college fees, then buying them back later after months of sacrifice. That jewelry was not wealth. It was our life story. And she had sold it like old furniture. I pressed the receipt against my chest and cried silently on her bedroom floor. Not loud crying. Old people rarely cry loudly. Our sorrow becomes quieter with age. Heavier too. After some time, I heard the front gate outside. Mira was home early. Panic rushed through me. I quickly wiped my face and stood up. But before I could leave the room, she appeared in the doorway. And froze. Her eyes immediately fell to the pouch in my hands. Then to the receipt. The silence between us became terrifying. "You searched my room?" she whispered. I looked at her. "You sold my jewelry." Neither of us moved. Then suddenly her shoulders dropped. As if some invisible weight had finally crushed her completely. "Yes," she whispered. The word hit me harder than shouting ever could. I stared at her in disbelief. "You admit it so easily?" Tears filled her eyes instantly. "I was going to tell you." "When?" My voice cracked. "After everything was gone?" "I had no choice." "There is always a choice." Her breathing became uneven. "You don't understand." "Then explain it to me." My voice echoed louder than intended. She looked startled. I almost never shouted. Not even when she was a child. But pain had finally burst through me. "That necklace," I cried, "your father sold his scooter to buy it for me. We walked everywhere for almost a year because of that necklace." "I know." "No, you don't know." I shouted. "You don't know what it meant." She suddenly covered her face and burst into tears. Real tears. Broken tears. I was desperate, Ma. I stared at her silently. Then she whispered the words that changed everything. "Rohan owes money. My grandson." I felt my stomach twist. "What?" "He borrowed from the wrong people." The room suddenly felt colder. "How much?" She hesitated. Then barely whispered, 20 lakhs. I nearly stopped breathing. 20 lakhs. "Oh my God." "He said it was for business," she cried. Then everything collapsed. Now those men keep calling. Threatening him. I sank slowly onto the bed. My mind spun. Rohan. The same little boy who used to sleep beside me during thunderstorms. The same boy who once saved coins for months to buy me slippers because mine were torn. Impossible. And yet, I remembered recently how distant he had become. How rarely he visited. How nervous Mira always looked after speaking with him. When did this start? I asked weakly. Months ago. And you never told me? She laughed bitterly through tears. What would I say? That my son destroyed his life gambling on some stupid business deal? Gambling. The word landed like poison. I closed my eyes. Our family had already suffered enough after Mira's divorce. She had spent years rebuilding herself. And now this. I tried loans, she whispered. I tried friends. Nobody helped. So you stole from me? She flinched painfully. Yes. The honesty of it hurt even more. I looked at the loan bangle still in my hand. Why keep this one? Her face crumpled. Because I couldn't sell everything. I stared at her. That bangle was from the day I was born, she whispered. I remembered you telling me that story. Suddenly tears poured down her face harder. I hated myself while doing it. Then why continue? Because they threatened Rohan. Her voice cracked violently. They said they'd come to the house next. They said they knew where you lived. Fear entered me then. Real fear. Not for money. For family. For blood. Mira collapsed onto the floor crying. I didn't know what else to do. I watched my daughter break apart in front of me. And something terrible happened inside my heart. My anger began fighting with my love. Because that is the curse of motherhood. Even betrayal cannot kill love completely. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to hold her. Both feelings existed together. And both were destroying me. Finally, I asked quietly, how much jewelry is left? She looked down. Only 2 pieces. My chest tightened again. Which ones? The wedding ring and the temple necklace. I closed my eyes in relief. Not because of the money. Because those 2 mattered most. The temple necklace had belonged to my mother. And my wedding ring. Hari had placed it on my finger while his hands shook from nervousness. I still remembered the priest laughing softly. Son, relax. She's not running away. For the first time that day, a broken smile touched my lips through tears. Then it vanished. Where are the remaining pieces? In another pawn shop, she whispered. Can we get them back? She hesitated. Yes, but only if we pay soon. How soon? 3 days. I looked at her carefully. Why didn't you come to me? Her face twisted with shame. Because I already failed enough in life. That answer silenced me. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then quietly, very quietly, I asked the question that truly terrified me. Are those men dangerous? Mira looked away. And that silence told me everything. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. A storm was coming. And somehow I knew. Our family's worst days were not over yet. That night, neither Mira nor I slept. The storm arrived just after midnight. Heavy rain battered the windows while thunder shook the old house like an angry spirit. The electricity flickered twice before settling into a dim yellow glow. I sat in the living room wrapped in my shawl, staring at the family photographs lining the wall. So many smiling faces. So many years. And somehow, despite all that love, we had still become strangers to one another. Mira sat across from me at the dining table, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of untouched tea. She looked smaller somehow. Not physically. Emotionally. As though guilt had folded her inward. Finally, after hours of silence, I spoke. How bad is it really? She looked up slowly. Then she whispered, worse than I told you. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course it was. Bad news always arrives in pieces. Never all at once. How much worse? Her voice shook. Rohan borrowed from more than one person. I felt my heartbeat quicken. How many? 3 lenders. And the total? She stared at the table. Almost 30 lakhs now, with interest. For a moment, the room spun around me. 30 lakhs. My grandson had buried himself alive. I pressed trembling fingers against my forehead. What was he thinking? He thought he could double the money quickly, she whispered. One friend convinced him to invest in some import business. Business? I snapped bitterly. That boy can barely manage his own laundry. A sad smile almost appeared on her face. Almost. He was desperate to prove himself. I knew that feeling. Rohan had struggled ever since losing his corporate job the previous year. He never admitted how deeply it hurt him, but I saw it in the way he stopped visiting relatives. Pride is a dangerous thing in men. Especially wounded men. Where is he now? I asked. At his apartment. Does he know you sold my jewelry? She nodded weakly. And? He cried. I laughed once. A tired, painful laugh. Well, at least shame hasn't completely left this family. Mira flinched. Immediately, regret touched me. I was angry at her. But she was already drowning. And sometimes angry words push drowning people deeper underwater. I sighed heavily. I'm sorry. No, she whispered. You should hate me. I looked at my daughter for a long moment. Then quietly said, if mothers could truly hate their children, the world would be a much colder place. Her eyes filled instantly. She turned away before I could see her cry again. Outside, rain hammered the gate harder. Then suddenly, honk. Both of us froze. A car horn. Outside the house. At 1:17 in the morning. Another honk followed. Longer this time. Mira's face went pale immediately. Oh no. Fear rushed through me. Who is it? She stood so fast her chair nearly tipped over. Stay inside. But before she could reach the window, bang. Someone hit the front gate hard. Then another bang. And another. My chest tightened violently. Mira, a male voice shouted from outside. Come out. I had never heard that voice before. But I immediately hated it. The rain continued pouring while the man kept yelling. You think we're stupid? Hiding inside won't solve anything. Mira looked terrified. Real terror. The kind that strips all strength from a person. I stood slowly. How do they know this house? She looked ashamed. Rohan must have told them. Another bang rattled the gate. Then a second voice shouted, we want our money. I felt cold all over. At 74 years old, I had lived through hardships. Illness. Debt. Death. But nothing prepares you for danger arriving at your own gate in the middle of the night. Mira grabbed her phone with trembling hands. I'll call Rohan. She dialed quickly. No answer. Again. Still nothing. Oh God, she whispered. Outside, headlights flashed through the rain. I carefully moved toward the curtain and peeked outside. 3 men stood near the gate. Young. Large. Angry. One kicked the metal gate violently. I stepped back immediately. They're criminals, I whispered. Mira looked like she might faint. Then suddenly, the lights went out. Complete darkness swallowed the house. The storm had killed the power. I heard Mira gasp. Outside, the men started shouting louder. "Come out now." For one terrible moment, I truly thought they might break in. My hand shook violently as I reached for Mira in the darkness. And instinctively, she grabbed my hand like a frightened child. Just like she used to during thunderstorms when she was little. The memory nearly broke me. "Ma," she whispered. I squeezed her hand tightly. "It's all right." Though honestly, I wasn't sure it was. We stood there in darkness listening to the storm and the shouting outside. Then suddenly, another voice echoed through the rain. "Hey! What's going on here?" Our neighbor, Mr. Suresh, the retired army officer from across the street. One of the men outside muttered something angrily. Then Suresh shouted louder, "I've called the police." Silence followed. A few seconds later, car doors slammed. The engine started. And finally, the vehicle drove away. Mira collapsed into a chair sobbing. I stood frozen, still gripping the edge of the table for balance. My entire body felt weak. A few minutes later, electricity returned. The lights flickered back on. Everything looked normal again. The sofa, the curtains, the clock. But nothing felt normal anymore. Our home no longer felt safe. Mira covered her face. "I'm sorry," she cried. "I'm so sorry." I sat beside her slowly. "When were you planning to tell me things had gotten this dangerous?" "I thought I could fix it first." That's what people always think before disaster arrives. She cried harder. And suddenly my anger softened again. Not disappeared, but softened. Because in front of me wasn't a villain. Just a frightened mother trying desperately to save her son. The same way I once tried to save her. Around 3 in the morning, there was another knock at the gate. This time softer. Careful. We both froze again. Then a familiar voice called out weakly. "Mom?" "Rohan." Mira rushed to open the door. He entered drenched from the rain. And for a moment, I barely recognized him. He looked terrible. His beard was untrimmed. Eyes red. Clothes soaked. But worst of all, he looked ashamed. Deeply ashamed. The moment he saw me, tears filled his eyes. "Nanny." I stared at him silently. This was the same boy who used to bring me flowers stolen from neighbor gardens. The same boy who held my hand while crossing roads even after he became taller than me. And now strangers were threatening our family because of him. He fell to his knees suddenly. "I'm sorry." Mira immediately started crying again. But I remained silent. Rohan lowered his head. "I never meant for this to happen." "Then what did you mean to happen?" I asked quietly. He looked shattered. "I thought I could fix everything. By borrowing money from criminals? It wasn't supposed to become this bad." His voice cracked. "They promised quick profits. I lost money at first, then borrowed more trying to recover it. Gambling thinking. Desperate thinking. The kind that ruins lives." I closed my eyes briefly. "How much have you lost?" He whispered the number again. 30 lakhs. Hearing it aloud from him made it feel even uglier. Then he looked at me carefully. And softly said words that pierced my heart. "I heard about the jewelry." I looked away. "I'll earn it back." "No," I said quietly. "You won't." He started crying openly then. "I know I ruined everything." Mira sat beside him, holding his shoulder. Mother and son. Both broken. And somehow I suddenly saw the truth clearly. Pain travels through families like inheritance. One person falls, and everyone falls with them. Rohan wiped his face. They won't stop, Nanny. What do you mean? I still owe most of it. Fear returned to the room instantly. How much? 18 lakhs. My breathing slowed. Still enormous. Still impossible. Then he whispered something even worse. They threatened violence. Mira gasped softly. I looked at him sharply. What kind of violence? He hesitated too long. And that silence frightened me more than any answer. Finally, he whispered, one man said accidents happen to old people all the time. The room became deathly quiet. Mira burst into tears again. But strangely, I did not panic. Instead, a calmness came over me. A cold, steady calm. Because when fear grows too large, something inside old people changes. We stop fearing for ourselves. We start fearing only for our children. I stood slowly. Both of them looked at me. Then I walked toward my bedroom. Ma? Mira asked nervously. I opened the cupboard carefully, reached behind folded saris, and pulled out a cloth packet. Inside it were the last remaining pieces of jewelry. My wedding ring, and my mother's temple necklace. I carried them back to the living room. Mira's eyes widened instantly. Ma, no. I placed them on the table. Rohan stared in horror. Nanny. This family will not live in fear, I said quietly. But those are the last. I know exactly what they are. My fingers touched the temple necklace gently. My mother wore this while fleeing during the riots in 1947, I whispered. She hid it inside flour sacks to survive. Then I touched my wedding ring. And this ring belonged to 50 years of love. Tears filled my eyes. But jewelry is still only metal. My voice trembled. You three are flesh and blood. Mira began shaking her head immediately. No. I already destroyed enough. You made mistakes, I corrected softly. That is different. Rohan looked broken. I don't deserve this family. No, I said. But you still have it. He burst into tears again. And for the first time since all this began, I walked forward and held my grandson. He clung to me like a child. Like the little boy he used to be. And as thunder echoed outside, 3 generations of one broken family cried together in the middle of the night. But deep inside me, another pain still remained. Because forgiveness is not instant. And trust, once shattered, does not return so easily. Especially between a mother and daughter. The next morning, everything changed again. Because someone knocked on our door. And standing outside was the police. The police arrived at 8:40 in the morning. I remember the exact time because none of us had slept, and I had been staring at the wall clock when the knock came. 3 sharp knocks. Firm. Official. The kind that immediately makes your heart sink. Mira froze while pouring tea. Rohan stood up so quickly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. For one terrible second, nobody moved. Then the knock came again. Police, a voice called from outside. Mira looked like she might collapse. Rohan whispered, they reported me. I stood slowly. At my age, fear behaves differently. It doesn't explode. It settles quietly into your bones. I'll open the door, I said. Ma, no. I said I'll open it. Something in my voice silenced both of them. I walked carefully to the front entrance and opened it. 2 officers stood outside in rain-damp uniforms. One was young, maybe 30. The other older, with tired but kind eyes. Mrs. Savitri Sharma? The older officer asked politely. Yes. We received a complaint involving threats connected to this address. Behind me, I heard Mira inhale sharply. The officer noticed immediately. May we come in? I stepped aside silently. They entered the living room while Mira and Rohan stood there looking guilty before a word had even been spoken. The younger officer glanced around carefully. Then the older one spoke gently. There were reports of men harassing this household last night. I blinked. Harassing. Not debt collection. Not theft. Harassment. You mean the men outside? I asked. Yes. Relief flickered across Rohan's face. The officer turned toward him. You are Rohan? Yes, sir. We've had complaints about the lender involved. My eyes narrowed slightly. What kind of complaints? The older officer sighed. Illegal intimidation. Threats. Harassment tactics. Mira covered her mouth softly. The officer continued. One neighbor reported part of the incident last night and contacted authorities. Mr. Suresh. God bless that man. Rohan looked stunned. But, they said they'd ruin me. They say that to everyone, the younger officer muttered bitterly. The older officer shot him a look before turning back to us. We need statements from all of you. For the next hour, our home felt strange. Too bright. Too quiet. Like a hospital waiting room after bad news. The officers asked questions carefully while Mira answered through shame and tears. Yes, Rohan borrowed money. Yes, threats had been made. Yes, men arrived at the house. But somehow, nobody mentioned the jewelry. Not yet. I sat silently listening to my daughter blame herself for everything. And something inside me slowly began changing. Not forgiving. Not fully. But softening. Because pain looked different in daylight. At night, betrayal had felt enormous. But in the morning, sitting beside her exhausted face and trembling hands, I no longer saw a thief. I saw my child. Broken. Frightened. Human. When the officers finally stood to leave, the older one handed Rohan a card. You need legal financial counseling immediately, he said firmly. And you stay away from those lenders. Rohan nodded shakily. Then the officer looked at me. You have a good neighbor watching out for you, madam. I smiled faintly. Yes, I whispered. I do. After they left, silence filled the house again. Nobody knew what to say. Finally, Mira spoke. You should hate me. I looked at her. She had repeated those words so many times now. As though she needed punishment to breathe. Rohan stared at the floor. I ruined this family. No, I said quietly. They both looked up. This family was already hurting long before money disappeared. Tears filled Mira's eyes again. I sighed and slowly sat down on the sofa. Come here. Both of you. They obeyed like children. Rohan sat near my feet while Mira sat beside me. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then I looked at my daughter carefully. Do you know what hurt me most? She wiped her face. The jewelry? No. She looked surprised. It was that you suffered alone. Her expression shattered instantly. You're my daughter, I whispered. You should have come to me before the fear became bigger than your heart. She burst into tears again. This time quieter. The exhausted tears people cry after fighting too long. I was ashamed, she whispered. I nodded slowly. I know. Then I turned toward Rohan. And you? He looked up weakly. You thought becoming successful mattered more than asking for help. He began crying silently. I just wanted Mom to stop worrying about money. Mira stared at him in shock. You idiot boy, she whispered brokenly. He laughed painfully through tears. I know. I reached for his hand. Your grandfather used to say something very important. Rohan squeezed my fingers gently. What? I smiled sadly. He said, a family becomes poor only when love leaves the house. Tears rolled down my cheeks then. Money comes and goes. Gold comes and goes. But when people stop trusting each other, that is true poverty. The room fell silent. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. Sunlight slowly pushed through clouds and entered the living room in soft golden streaks. Exactly the kind of sunlight Hari loved. For a brief moment, I could almost imagine him sitting in his old chair nearby, listening quietly. Then suddenly Mira stood up. Without a word, she walked to her bedroom. A few moments later, she returned carrying the black pouch. She placed it in my lap. Inside was the remaining bangle. And something else. Cash. I looked at her in confusion. I sold my car this morning online, she whispered. What? I can recover some of the jewelry. No. She stared at me. No? I closed the pouch gently. The jewelry served its purpose. Her face crumpled. But it belonged to you. Yes, I said softly. And I used it for my family. Rohan covered his face crying. Mira knelt beside me. I don't deserve you. I touched her cheek carefully. When you were 7 years old, I whispered, you broke my favorite vase. A tiny laugh escaped her through tears. You remember that? You hid the pieces under your bed. She nodded weakly. But eventually you came crying to tell me the truth. My voice trembled slightly. This time you waited too long. She lowered her head in shame. But you still came back. For a long moment, she simply held my hand against her face. Then softly she whispered the words I think I had needed most. I'm sorry, Ma. Not defensive. Not rushed. Not guilty. Just honest. And somehow, that honesty healed something inside me. Weeks passed after that. Slowly, life began rebuilding itself. Rohan took a smaller job at a logistics company while attending financial counseling sessions. Mira stopped hiding bills and fears from me. And together, we worked through the remaining debt honestly. It was not easy. Some days were ugly. Some days were humiliating. But they were truthful. And truth, even painful truth, is lighter to carry than lies. One evening about 2 months later, Rohan came home holding a tiny velvet box. Nanny, he said nervously. I frowned. What is this? Open it. Inside was a simple gold ring. Small. Modest. Nothing extravagant. I looked at him in surprise. It's not replacing Dadaji's ring, he said quickly. Nothing can. My throat tightened. But, he continued softly, I wanted you to have something from me too. I stared at the ring for several seconds before tears blurred my vision completely. Then I laughed quietly. "You know," I whispered, "your grandfather would have complained that you paid too much." Rohan smiled through tears. And for the first time in many months, our home felt warm again. That night, after everyone slept, I opened the old wooden jewelry box once more. The velvet lining was still mostly empty. But somehow, it no longer looked lonely. I placed the new ring inside carefully. Then I touched the lid gently and smiled. Because I finally understood something important. The true treasure my husband left me was never gold. It was the family we built together. Messy, broken, imperfect, but still holding on to one another after the storm. And at my age, that is worth more than all the jewelry in the world.